The river didn't give the baby back. A girl stood knee-deep in reeds, holding her breath so hard it hurt. The water looked calm, like it always did, but she knew what calm could hide. One wrong ripple, one hungry bird, one careless wave, and the basket would vanish like it never mattered. Her hands were clenched so tight, her nails cut her skin. She didn't cry. Crying was loud. Loud got you noticed, and being noticed was dangerous now. Dangerous like soldiers, dangerous like questions, dangerous like a mother's empty arms. She stared at the little basket drifting just inches away, nudging it gently with a stick, keeping it in the shadow. She wanted to reach in and touch the tiny face again, to make sure he was still warm, still breathing, still here. But she couldn't, not yet. Footsteps, soft, female, close. The girl froze. If she ran, the basket would drift out. If she stayed, she might be seen. And if she was seen, everything could break. She swallowed fear like a stone and whispered to herself, "Choose." Then she saw who was coming, someone who could destroy them or save them. She knew that walk, slow, proud, like the ground belonged to her. The girl lowered her body deeper into the reeds until the wet leaves brushed her cheeks. Through a crack in the plants, she saw bright cloth, shining jewelry, servants behind, an entire small world moving toward the river. The girl's heart slammed. Pharaoh's house, the same house that made mothers hide their sons, the same house that turned babies into secrets. The woman stopped at the edge of the water. Her servants began to laugh and talk, undoing sandals, testing the river with cautious toes. But the woman's eyes drifted, sharp, searching, bored for a moment, then caught on the basket. The girl's stomach dropped. The basket rocked once, as if it had heard its own name. One servant waded out and grabbed it. She lifted it high like a prize. "My lady!" The woman stepped closer. She didn't smile. She didn't rush. She simply reached out and opened the basket, and then sound. A small cry, thin but alive, cutting through the air. The woman's face changed. Not much, just a flicker, like a door in her heart, moved a little. She looked down at the baby and whispered, almost angry at herself, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." The girl heard every word. This was the moment where mercy could die or begin. The girl could have stayed hidden and lived, but she didn't come here to live. She came here to fight for him. Her knees shook as she rose from the reeds. Water slid from her dress. Every servant turned. Their eyes hit her like stones. One of them lifted a hand, ready to shout. The woman, Pharaoh's daughter, lifted her chin. "Who are you?" The girl forced her voice to work. "A Hebrew." The word tasted like danger. Silence. The baby whimpered again, small fists opening and closing, searching for something he couldn't name. The woman held him tighter than she meant to. The girl saw it. She saw the struggle in the woman's face. Power on one side, pity on the other. So the girl moved fast, before pity could lose. "Shall I go," she said, "and call a nurse for you, from the Hebrew women, so the child can be fed?" One servant gasped, like the girl had insulted the palace itself. Another frowned, waiting for punishment. But the woman didn't punish her. She stared at the baby, then at the girl, like she was measuring a risk and choosing it. "Go," she said. One word, heavy as fate. The girl turned and ran, reeds tearing at her legs, tears burning her eyes at last. Now she had seconds to bring the one person who could keep this baby alive, his mother. She ran like the air itself was chasing her. Every step felt too loud. Mud grabbed her feet. Thorns scratched her ankles. If anyone stopped her, if any soldier asked why a Hebrew girl was sprinting from the river, she had no lie ready, only a prayer pounding in her chest. Please, please, please. At the edge of the workers' huts, smoke and sweat hung in the heat. Women turned as she burst through, wild-eyed. She found her mother by the doorway, hands empty, arms still shaped like they expected weight. The girl didn't explain. She didn't have time. She grabbed her mother's wrist. "Come, now!" Her mother's face tightened. "Miriam?" "Yes, it's him," Miriam whispered, the name slipping out like a secret blade. "He's alive, but not for long unless you move." That word, alive, broke something open. Her mother stumbled after her, half running, half praying, her breath catching like she might scream. Miriam kept pulling, guiding her through back paths, away from open roads, away from eyes. When they reached the reeds again, Miriam slowed. The world felt too still, too bright, like heaven was watching. Pharaoh's daughter stood where she left her, the baby against her chest. The servants looked impatient now, like kindness had a short leash. Miriam stepped forward and pushed her mother gently ahead. Her mother's knees nearly buckled at the sight. Her mouth trembled, but she swallowed her cry. The princess looked at the Hebrew woman. "Take this child," she said, "and nurse him for me. I will pay you. Pay you." Miriam watched her mother nod, because nodding was safer than speaking. And as her mother took the baby, her hands shook like she was holding fire. She carried him like a thief carries treasure, close, hidden, ready to run. Back in the hut, the air smelled of clay and old bread. Her mother sat in the darkest corner and pulled the baby to her chest. The moment he latched on, her shoulders dropped like she'd been holding up the sky. A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob, but she pressed it into her own sleeve so no one outside could hear. Miriam watched the baby's tiny fingers curl around her mother's skin, so small, so helpless. And yet his life now hung on a stranger's mercy and a princess's mood. "We can't celebrate," Miriam whispered. "Not even inside." Her mother nodded. Her eyes were wet, but sharp. "He is alive today," she said softly. "That is enough." Footsteps passed outside, heavy, careless. A man's voice, then another. Miriam's blood went cold. She moved to the door and listened. The voices faded, but the warning stayed. That night, Miriam didn't sleep. She sat with her back to the wall, staring at the baby's rising breath, counting it like minutes. Because one day soon they would have to hand him back. Days became a careful kind of torture. In the morning, Miriam helped her mother grind grain, fetch water, fold cloth, normal tasks that had to look normal. But every sound outside made her flinch, a shout, a cartwheel, the scrape of sandals. When soldiers passed, she held her breath until her ribs ached. The baby grew quieter, then louder. His cries got stronger, strong enough to betray them. So Miriam learned new tricks. She learned the soft sway that calmed him, the little hum her mother used, low as a whisper. She learned how to time his feeding so his belly stayed full and his voice stayed small. But fear never left the room. It sat in the corner with them. One afternoon, Miriam returned from the river with a jar of water and heard it. One sharp, high cry. She froze at the doorway. Her mother was already covering the baby's mouth with gentle fingers, eyes wide with panic. Outside, someone laughed. Someone stopped. Miriam's mind raced. If a neighbor heard, they might tell, not out of evil, out of survival. Everyone was scared. Everyone wanted to be the one who wasn't blamed. Then the footsteps moved on. Her mother's hands shook as she lifted the baby again. "He's getting too big," she whispered, "too alive." Miriam stared at her little brother's face, smooth cheeks, dark eyes, blinking at nothing. He didn't know his name was dangerous. He didn't know he was borrowed time. Miriam swallowed hard. "How long?" she asked. Her mother didn't answer right away. Then she said the truth like it was a wound. "Until a princess comes for him." And Miriam understood. The river had not been the last test. It was only the first. The day the messenger came, Miriam felt it before she heard it. The hut went quiet in a way that didn't belong to peace. Even the baby stopped fussing, as if the air warned him. Then footsteps approached, steady, confident, not afraid of Hebrew dirt. A shadow crossed the doorway. A servant of the palace stood there, clean and bright, like a knife. "The princess is ready," she said. No greeting, no warmth, just a command, dressed as news. Miriam's mother didn't move. She held the baby so tightly his face pressed into her shoulder. Her lips formed a prayer with no sound. Miriam stepped forward. "He will have what he needs," the servant cut in. Her eyes slid over the hut as if judging it for existing. "Bring the child." Miriam watched her mother's hands tremble as she wrapped the baby in the best cloth they owned. Not beautiful, not royal, just clean, soft, and soaked with love. She kissed his forehead once, twice, then forced herself to stop, like too many kisses might expose her. Outside, the sun was cruel. Miriam walked beside her mother, close enough to feel her shaking. People watched from doorways, pretending not to. Everyone knew what it meant when a Hebrew woman carried a baby toward the river with palace servants behind. At the reeds, Pharaoh's daughter waited under shade, calm as stone. Miriam's chest tightened. This woman had saved him once, but saving once didn't mean saving forever. The princess reached out. "Give him to me." For a heartbeat, Miriam thought her mother would run. She didn't. She simply handed over her own heart and tried not to collapse. The baby didn't cry when the princess took him. That was the cruelest part. He blinked up at her, calm, like he could not tell the difference between silk and rough cloth, between palace and hut, between a mother and a stranger. Miriam felt anger rise, hot and shameful, because the child didn't know who had fought for him. The princess studied his face. Her fingers brushed his cheek, careful, almost gentle. Then her eyes lifted to Miriam's mother. "You will be paid," she said, like that could cover the cost. Coins clinked into a servant's hand. The sound was bright and cold. Miriam wanted to shove them into the river. Her mother stared at the baby one last time. Her lips moved without words. Miriam knew what she was saying. "Leave, Leave, Leave." The princess turned to leave, and the servants fell in line. The baby's blanket shifted, and Miriam saw the tiny wrist again, the one that used to grip her mother's skin. Now it gripped air. Miriam couldn't let it end like that, not as a silent theft. She took one step forward. "My lady," she said, voice steady only because fear had burned it clean. The princess paused. Miriam forced herself to meet those royal eyes. "He needs a name." A strange stillness settled. Servants watched, ready for punishment. Her mother's breath caught. The princess looked down at the baby, then back at Miriam. For a moment she seemed almost tired, like she had not asked to be part of this war. "I will name him," she said at last, "because I drew him out of the water." Miriam felt the words land like a mark on the child's life. Water, rescue, danger, destiny. And as the princess walked away with the baby, Miriam realized something terrifying. This child would grow up in the house of their enemy. Miriam didn't follow them like a child. She followed like a shadow that refused to die. Days later, she found a place near the palace road where workers carried bricks and guards didn't look twice. She learned the rhythm of the gates when they opened, when they swallowed people whole. She watched for one small bundle in royal arms. Then she saw him again. Not a bundle now. A baby in clean linen held by a nurse with soft hands. The nurse smiled down at him and said a name Miriam had never heard in her home. Moses. Miriam felt the name hit her chest. It sounded like water and stone, like rescue that could also become a weapon. She stayed hidden and watched him grow in flashes, carried through courtyards, lifted toward sunlit columns, surrounded by gold he didn't earn. He would never know the smell of their hut, He would never hear their mother's quiet prayers at night, unless Miriam made sure he did. She didn't know how yet, but she made a promise in her heart, sharp and simple. He will not forget who he is. Time made the baby into a boy, and the boy into a question. Miriam saw him less as he grew. The palace walls seemed higher every season, and guards learned faces. Still, she found ways. Market crowds, festival days, moments when the royal family passed like a moving storm. He walked now, holding a servant's hand. His hair was trimmed neat. His sandals were soft. When he laughed, it sounded free. Miriam hated that laugh and loved it. One day, from behind a line of baskets, she saw him stop and stare at Hebrew workers hauling stone, men with bent backs, women with cracked hands. The air around them smelled of sweat and dust, not perfume. The boy's smile faded. His eyes narrowed, confused, like he was looking at a mirror that didn't match his clothes. A guard nudged him forward. "Keep moving." But the boy didn't. He kept staring. Then his gaze shifted, past the workers, toward Miriam's hiding place. Her throat tightened. She didn't move. If she ran, she would be caught. If she stayed, she might be seen. The boy's eyes held on the shadows, searching. For a heartbeat, Miriam felt something impossible, recognition, not full, not clear, but a pull. Then the servant tugged him away, and the moment snapped like a reed in wind. Miriam exhaled like she'd been underwater. He was growing, he was watching, and somewhere inside him a buried truth was waking up, slow, dangerous, unstoppable. Miriam was older now, but fear aged faster than she did. She heard rumors before she saw him, whispers that a prince had been walking alone, without laughter, without the easy smile of the palace. Some said he asked too many questions. Some said he stared at the slave lines like he was counting souls. Then one dusk, Miriam saw him step off the royal road and into the narrow paths where Hebrews lived. No parade, no music, just him and one guard, trailing far behind, bored and careless. Miriam pressed back into a doorway shadow. The man's shoulders were broad now. His eyes were sharper. But the way he looked at the huts, at the smoke, the cramped rooms, the children with thin arms, was not the look of a visitor. It was the look of someone trying to remember something that hurts. A Hebrew man stumbled under a load of bricks. The prince's jaw tightened. He moved closer, like his body chose before his mind did. The guard hissed, "Don't!" The prince ignored him. He watched the whip marks on the man's back. He watched the blood mix with dust, and Miriam saw it, something inside him shifting, like a door finally breaking open. He didn't belong to the palace the way they thought. And if the palace realized that, it would not stay quiet. Miriam watched his hands. They were not the hands of a slave, no cracks, no stains of clay that never wash out. Yet those hands curled into fists when the overseer shouted. They tightened when the whip rose again. The prince scanned the street as if measuring who was watching. Miriam felt her own breath stop. She knew that look. It was the look of a decision being born. An Egyptian overseer slammed a Hebrew man to the ground. "Faster!" he roared. The Hebrew's face hit dirt. No one moved, not because they didn't care, because they couldn't. The prince stepped forward. The guard's eyes widened. "My lord, enough." The prince's voice was low, but it cut. The overseer turned, confused, then annoyed. "This is my work." The prince moved closer. Miriam could see his jaw shaking like he was holding back a storm. The overseer raised his whip again, just to prove he could, and something snapped. The prince lunged. It was fast and ugly, two bodies colliding, fists, a choke of breath. The whip fell. The overseer staggered. The prince's hands locked on him with a strength that did not feel royal. Then silence. The overseer dropped, hard, too hard. His head hit the ground and didn't lift again. Miriam's stomach turned to ice. The prince stood over the body, chest heaving, eyes wide like he couldn't believe what his hands had done. He looked left, right. The street was frozen. The Hebrews stared like statues. Miriam understood in one sick flash. This secret would not stay buried, and neither would the dead man. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the world exhaled in terror. A Hebrew man backed away. Another turned his face like he hadn't seen, because seeing meant owning the truth, and owning the truth could get you killed. The prince bent down, shaking, and dragged the body toward a patch of loose sand near a wall. It was desperate, clumsy work, royal hands trying to hide a crime like a child hiding broken pottery. Miriam's mind raced, run, hide, pray, but she couldn't move, not yet. She watched him scoop sand over the overseer's face, watched him press it down as if the earth could swallow guilt. The prince stood up, eyes wild, and scanned the street again. When his gaze swept past Miriam's doorway, she felt heat rush to her cheeks. She expected him to shout, to point, to demand silence. He didn't. He just looked wounded, like he had finally chosen his people and the choice had already cost blood. Then he turned and walked away fast, head lowered, the guard stumbling after him. Miriam waited until the street moved again, until whispers began like insects. She stepped out and looked at the disturbed sand, a small mound, a terrible secret. Someone would talk. Not because they wanted to, but because fear makes mouths loose. Miriam clenched her fists. The palace would find out. Pharaoh would not forgive, and the boy she had watched for years was now a hunted man. The next day, the air tasted different, like everyone had swallowed smoke. Miriam moved through the worker lines, hearing half-sentences. "Did you hear? He killed a prince. Don't say it." Each whisper was a spark searching for dry grass. Then she saw him again. The prince walked into the same area like he owned it, but his eyes were restless now, scanning faces, searching for the edge of betrayal. He stopped where two Hebrew men argued, their voices sharp with anger and fatigue. One shoved the other. "Get off me!" The prince stepped between them. "Why are you fighting your brother?" The words sounded right, but the street didn't soften. One man spat in the dust and glared. "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us?" Miriam's throat tightened. She saw the prince flinch, like that sentence hit deeper than any fist. Then the man leaned in and hissed the words that would ruin him. "Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" Silence crashed down. The prince's face drained. His eyes widened, not in anger, in fear. Not fear of Hebrews, fear of the palace, fear of Pharaoh's power reaching through every wall. "So the thing is known," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. Miriam felt sick. That secret mound of sand was already breaking open. The prince turned away fast, like the ground might swallow him next. And Miriam understood. He wasn't deciding if he would run. He was deciding how long he had left. By sunset, the palace knew. Miriam didn't see the message delivered, but she saw the result. Guards moving with purpose, sandals striking stone like drums, doors closing, voices rising behind walls. The city felt like it was holding its breath. Then the rumor hit like a slap. Pharaoh wanted him dead, not punished, not warned. Dead. Miriam's legs went weak. She leaned against a wall, fighting to stay upright. After all these years, after the river, the basket, the naming, this was how it might end. Not with a prophecy, not with a miracle, with a knife in a hallway. She ran to the edge of the Hebrew quarter where she sometimes watched the palace road. People were already gathering, pretending to work while their eyes tracked the guards. And then she saw him. The prince moved fast. No royal escort now, only a cloak pulled tight. His face was hard, but his eyes were burning. Behind him, at a distance, 2 guards pushed through the crowd, hunting. He didn't look like a prince anymore. He looked like a man being chased by his own life. Miriam wanted to call out, to warn him, to tell him where to turn, but one sound from her mouth could draw every eye. So she did the only thing she could. She stepped into the flow of people and shifted it, just enough. A basket dropped, a shout, bodies moved. The guards stumbled for a second. The prince found a gap and disappeared into a side path. Miriam's heart hammered. She hadn't saved him with power. She hadn't saved him with a sword. She saved him the way she always had, quietly, quickly, with everything to lose. He was gone by morning. Miriam stood where the palace road met the open land, staring at dust that had already settled. No footprints, no sign, just the empty space where a life had turned and fled. People spoke his name carefully now, like it could bite. Some Hebrews were angry. He brought trouble. Others were proud. He struck an Egyptian. Most were terrified because Pharaoh's anger never stops at one man. Miriam's mother didn't say much. She sat with hands in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. The payment from the palace was long spent, but its cost kept growing. "He'll die out there," someone muttered. "The desert eats men." Miriam didn't answer. She pictured him alone, without servants, without walls, without the false safety of gold. A man raised as royal, now learning what it means to be hunted. That night, Miriam stepped outside and looked at the sky. Stars burned cold, endless. She remembered the river's dark surface, the basket, the moment she chose to stand up instead of hide. She had saved him once, twice, maybe 3 times. But this time she couldn't follow. All she could do was pray into the wind. God of our fathers, don't let the water be the last place you draw him out. Draw him out again. And somewhere beyond the city lights, beyond the reach of Pharaoh's hand, the story kept moving, without her eyes on it. Weeks passed, and Pharaoh's rage cooled into something worse, control. The whips did not stop. The brick quotas did not ease. If anything, the overseers seemed sharper, as if they needed to prove the palace was still strong. Miriam watched men stumble. She watched women hide bruises. She watched fear become normal. And still, at night, she listened for news. One trader said he heard of a Hebrew prince seen far east, beyond the green land, walking with nothing but a staff. Another said it was a lie, a story to make slaves dream. Miriam clung to every rumor like a thread. She imagined him under open sky, learning hunger, learning silence, learning what the palace never taught, what it feels like to have no one protecting you. Her mother tried to pull her back to reality. "Your life is here," she said quietly. "You have to live." But Miriam couldn't forget. Not when she had watched him from reeds and shadows for years. Not when she had seen his eyes change the day he chose the beaten man. One evening, a child in the hut next door started crying. The mother panicked and covered the child's mouth too hard, shaking. Miriam flinched, like time had looped back on itself. She understood then. The prince running away hadn't fixed anything. It had only moved the fire. If God was going to save them, it wouldn't be with one angry act in an alley. It would have to be something bigger. Something no palace could bury under sand. Miriam looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Where are you?" And the silence did not answer, yet. Seasons turned, and Miriam's hope started to feel like something you carry until it cuts your hands. She grew into a woman under the same sun, under the same shouting. New children were born into slavery. Old men died in it. Pharaoh stayed Pharaoh. The palace stayed tall. And the name Moses became a ghost word, spoken only when people thought no one was listening. Then, one market day, a stranger from far roads sold wool and stories. Miriam lingered near his stall like she wanted the price, but she wanted the rumor. "I heard," the man said low, "of an Egyptian who lives among shepherds now, married, quiet, strong, He doesn't walk like a slave, but he doesn't live like a prince either. Miriam's chest tightened. Married, quiet, gone. That night she sat with her mother, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Miriam whispered, "What if he never comes back?" Her mother didn't look up. "Then God will still be God." Miriam nodded, but inside she made her own vow. "If he returns, I will recognize him before anyone else does." The day Pharaoh died, nobody celebrated out loud. It came as a whisper first, passed hand to hand like stolen bread. The king is gone. The palace is in mourning. Maybe the whip will slow? Men glanced at the sky like it might change color. Women kept working because hope can get you punished. But the next overseer who walked by still carried his stick. The next quota still rose like a wall, and Miriam felt the truth settle in. A new Pharaoh could be worse, not better. That night, something broke across the slave camps, not rebellion, not courage, just grief. People cried out to God the way drowning people gasp for air. No speeches, no pretty prayers, just raw sound from throats that had swallowed pain for too long. Miriam stood among them, listening, her own tears hot and silent. She didn't know where Moses was. She didn't know if he was alive, but she felt this deep in her bones like a shift under the earth, as if heaven had leaned closer, as if their suffering had finally reached a place no king could block. Far from Egypt, Moses thought he had buried his old life. He walked behind sheep in the dry hills, letting the wind erase palace music from his ears. He had a wife now, a tent, a routine. Some days he almost believed he was safe, almost believed the past had stopped hunting him. Then one afternoon, the flock drifted toward a lonely slope, and Moses saw it. Fire on a bush. Not a big fire, not a storm. Just flames sitting there like it belonged. He slowed. The sheep kept chewing. The world kept breathing. But the bush, it burned and did not collapse into ash. Moses stepped closer, careful, like he was approaching a living thing. "I will turn aside," he muttered, "and see this great sight." The air felt thick, charged, as if the ground had memory. His heart beat like it used to beat near Pharaoh's halls. Only this time no guard could save him. Then a voice called his name from the fire, not loud, not gentle, certain. "Moses!" He froze. Every excuse, every plan, every quiet life he built felt suddenly small. He answered with one word that sounded like fear. "Here I am." The voice didn't ask. It commanded the moment. "Do not come closer," it said. "Take your sandals off your feet." Moses stared at the ground like it had turned into a blade. His hands fumbled at the straps. Leather fell into dust. His bare skin touched dirt, and suddenly the dirt felt alive, heavy, with someone else's presence. "This is holy ground." Moses' throat went dry. He wanted to look into the fire to understand, but his eyes dropped instead. He covered his face with his cloak because something in him knew. If he looked too directly, he would break. The voice spoke again, steady as stone. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses shook. The names were not palace names. They were Hebrew names, blood names. Then the voice said what Moses didn't want to hear. "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cry." Moses' heart pounded. Egypt! He hadn't said that word in years without tasting ash. And then the fire spoke the sentence that turned his quiet life to dust. "Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh." Moses didn't shout. He didn't argue like a prince. He pleaded like a man who knows what Egypt does to hope. "Who am I," he said, voice tight, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out?" The fire answered without flinching, "I will be with you." That should have been enough. But Moses' fear had layers. He could already see the palace doors, the guards, the cold smile of power. He could already hear laughter at a shepherd claiming God sent him. "What if they ask your name?" Moses said. "What shall I tell them?" The flame seemed to sharpen, not bigger, deeper, and the voice spoke like it was carving truth into the air. "I am who I am." Moses swallowed. The words didn't sound like a title. They sounded like existence itself. "Say to the Israelites," the voice continued, "I am has sent me to you." Moses felt his knees weaken. A name like that didn't fit inside a mouth. It was too heavy, too pure. And then, like a wound being opened on purpose, God said, "You will go to Pharaoh. He will not let you go." Moses flinched. Of course he wouldn't. Pharaoh never loosened his fist. But the voice didn't end there. It promised something Moses couldn't imagine. "I will stretch out my hand." And somewhere in Egypt, Miriam did not yet know it. But the rescue she had prayed for was already walking back toward her. Moses wanted to say yes. His mouth just wouldn't obey. "What if they don't believe me?" he asked. "What if they say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" The fire answered with signs, not comfort. A staff became a snake in the dust, alive, twisting, dangerous. Moses jumped back like a child. "Grab it," the voice said. He grabbed, and it stiffened into wood again. Then his hand turned sickly pale, like death had touched it. Moses' breath caught. The voice told him to put it back inside his cloak. He did, and it came out whole again. Miracle, warning, proof. Still Moses tried one last shield. "Please, Lord, I am not a man of words. I am slow of speech." The answer came sharp. "Who made man's mouth?" Moses had no reply, only fear. Then the voice softened just enough to corner him. "Your brother Aaron is coming. He will speak for you, but you will go." The fire didn't ask permission. It gave a mission. Moses picked up the staff, now more than wood, and stared into the desert, knowing the road back to Egypt was a road back into danger. Moses didn't ride back like a prince. He walked back like a man returning to a grave. The desert wind scraped his face for days. At night, he held the staff close, like it could keep fear from climbing into his chest. Then, on a rocky path, he saw a figure coming fast, older, familiar, moving with purpose. Aaron! They didn't waste words. They held each other like brothers who thought the other might be dead. Moses whispered what the fire had said. Aaron listened, eyes wide, then nodded like his heart already knew. When they reached the edge of Egypt, the smell hit Moses first. Mud, sweat, brick smoke. The old world hadn't changed. It was still hungry. They entered the Hebrew quarter quietly. Faces turned. Suspicion first, then shock. A man raised in the palace, now dressed like dust. Miriam stood among the women and froze. She knew that posture, that stare. The river had grown into a man. Moses looked at the crowd, then at Aaron. His voice was low but steady. "Gather the elders," he said, "tonight." Because if God had truly spoken, then silence was over. That night, the elders packed into a dim room, shoulder to shoulder. Their faces were lined from years of work, eyes hard from years of disappointment. They had heard promises before, from men who wanted to lead, from rumors that died by sunrise. So when Moses stood up, some crossed their arms. Some looked away. Moses spoke anyway. He told them the God of their fathers had seen their pain. He told them the time of forgetting was ending. Aaron repeated the words with a voice that carried, strong and clear. Then Moses lifted his staff. A gasp ran through the room as the sign happened. Fast. Real. Fear turned into stunned silence. The elders leaned forward like starving men smelling bread. Miriam watched from the edge, heart pounding. She saw the shift on their faces, disbelief cracking, hope pushing through like a stubborn seed. One old man dropped to his knees. Another began to weep. Soon many bowed their heads, not because Moses was powerful, but because the message was. "The Lord has visited us," someone whispered. Miriam felt tears rise, not loud tears, quiet ones that tasted like years. She thought of her prayers into the night sky, of her mother's empty arms, of the river that almost stole everything. Now Moses stood here, alive, saying God had not forgotten. But Miriam also saw Moses' eyes. They weren't celebrating. They were bracing, because the next step wasn't a meeting. It was Pharaoh. The palace doors were bigger than Moses remembered. That's what fear does. It makes power look endless. Guards stopped them at first. Spears crossed. Then a name was spoken, a message carried inside, and the doors opened like a mouth. Moses stepped through, Aaron at his side, the staff in his hand. Pharaoh sat high, surrounded by gold and hard faces. His eyes landed on Moses like a weight. Not surprise, not joy. Recognition, mixed with disgust. "You," Pharaoh said, voice smooth as polished stone. "The runaway." Moses felt the old heat of Egypt crawl up his spine, but he didn't bow like a son. He stood like a messenger. "Thus says the Lord," Moses said, and Aaron carried the words forward, "Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." A ripple of laughter moved through the court. Pharaoh's smile widened, cold. "Who is the Lord?" he asked, "that I should obey his voice?" The room waited. Moses held Pharaoh's gaze, refusing to blink. "We will go," Aaron said, "or disaster may fall on us." Pharaoh's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward. "Disaster?" he repeated, amused. "You want them to stop working? You want to weaken my kingdom." Then his voice turned sharp. "No." The word hit like a whip. "Not only no," Pharaoh added, rising, "I will show you what happens when slaves start dreaming." Moses felt it, a storm forming, and Miriam, far away in the slave quarter, would soon feel it too. Pharaoh's revenge was fast. It didn't wait for tomorrow. By the time Moses and Aaron returned to the streets, the order was already moving through the city like poison. No more straw for the Hebrew bricks. Same quota, same punishment, less material. Miriam heard the news when a man stumbled into the quarter, breathless, eyes wild. "They took the straw," he said. "We have to gather our own." At first people didn't understand. Then they did, and panic spread. Straw wasn't a small thing. It was what held the bricks together. Without it, the clay crumbled. And Pharaoh knew that. He wasn't just making work harder, he was making failure certain. The next morning, the fields filled with Hebrews tearing at stubble, hands bleeding, searching for scraps like animals. Overseers shouted, whips cracked, men came home with empty baskets and fuller bruises. Miriam watched her neighbors collapse in dust. She watched mothers try to soothe children while their own faces were tight with terror. And soon the anger turned toward one target, Moses. "He made it worse," someone yelled. "We were surviving until he came." Miriam's chest tightened. She wanted to scream back, "He's trying to save us." But saving had a cost, and they were paying it with their backs. That night, she saw Moses in the shadows, shoulders heavy. He looked like a man who had walked into Pharaoh's house with God's words and walked out with blood on his people. The next day, the foreman found Moses at the edge of the work lines. Their faces were tight with rage and fear. "May the Lord judge you," one spat. "You made us stink in Pharaoh's eyes. You put a sword in his hand to kill us." Moses didn't fight them. He just took the words like stones to the chest. Miriam watched from behind a wall, feeling helpless. She saw Moses' eyes flick toward the bruised backs, the broken bricks, the hungry children. His jaw trembled. That night, Moses walked away from the noise, away from every stare. He went where there was only wind and dark. Then he spoke upward, like a man talking to fire again. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh, he has hurt this people. You have not rescued them at all." Silence, long, heavy. Then, not loud, certain, an answer settled over him like a weight that also held him up. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh." Miriam didn't hear the words. But she saw Moses return with a different face, not happy, not calm, ready. Moses walked into Pharaoh's hall again, not as a runaway, not as a negotiator, as a warning. Aaron lifted the staff at Moses' signal. "Thus says the Lord," he declared, "let my people go." Pharaoh's eyes didn't even blink. "Show me," he said, bored. So Aaron threw the staff down. It hit the stone and became a serpent, thick and alive, sliding across the floor. The court gasped. Miriam wasn't there, but the story raced through the streets within hours, growing with every mouth. Pharaoh only smiled. He waved his hand, and his magicians stepped forward. They did the same. More serpents writhed on the floor like a nest of living ropes. For a heartbeat, it looked equal, like power could be matched. Then Moses' serpent lunged. One by one, it swallowed the others. The room went still as the last magician stepped back, pale. Pharaoh's face tightened, his jaw set like a gate locking. "Enough," he snapped. "Get out." Moses stepped forward. "This is only the beginning." But Pharaoh turned away, as if miracles were just the tricks. Outside, Miriam heard the report and felt hope rise, then stall, because the rumor ended with the same sentence every time. Pharaoh's heart stayed hard. The next morning, the river betrayed Egypt. Miriam went to fill a jar before the sun climbed too high. Women lined the bank like always, talking low, moving fast. Life depended on that water. Babies drank it. Clay needed it. Even the overseers needed it. Then Miriam saw the first splash. A man dipped his cup and jerked back. The water wasn't clear. It was dark, thick, red. He stared like his eyes were lying to him. Another woman screamed. Someone dropped a jar that shattered on the stones. The smell hit next. Not mud, not fish. Something sharp and rotten. The river looked like it had been wounded. Dead fish floated up, silver bellies turning in the sun. All along the bank people cried out, "It's blood!" Miriam's hand shook. She thought of Moses' words. This is only the beginning. By midday, even the canals and pools were ruined. People dug frantic holes near the river, desperate for clean water. And Pharaoh? Miriam heard he went back inside his palace like nothing happened. That's when she understood. Pharaoh wasn't just fighting Moses. He was fighting God. The blood didn't fade in a day. It lingered, staining Egypt's pride, choking its comfort. And when people finally found water in shallow holes, they drank like it might vanish again. Then the frogs came. At first it sounded almost funny. Children shouting, laughing, pointing, green bodies hopping near the canals. But the laughter died fast. The frogs didn't stop. They multiplied like a curse with legs. Miriam woke to wet slaps on the ground outside the hut. She stepped out and froze. Frogs covered the path. Frogs climbed the walls. Frogs filled baskets, ovens, kneading bowls. One jumped onto her foot, and she kicked it away, heart racing. In the slave lines, men tried to work while frogs leapt between bricks. Overseers shouted, slipping in the mud of squashed bodies, furious and helpless. The worst was the night. Frogs got into everything, under blankets, into water jars, into mouths mid-sleep. Miriam heard people gag and scream in the dark, and still Pharaoh would not bend. Miriam looked toward the distant palace, imagining frogs in royal beds, in perfumed halls, in Pharaoh's own hands. She whispered, "He can't ignore this forever." But deep down she feared something else. If Pharaoh wouldn't listen to blood, what would he do next? When the frogs died, Egypt didn't feel clean. It felt cursed. Piles of them rotted in the streets. The smell hung over everything, sweet, sick, impossible to escape. Miriam covered her nose with cloth, but the stench still found her. It was like Egypt itself was decaying. Then the gnats came. So small at first you thought it was dust and sunlight. Then it crawled. It bit. It filled eyes, ears, nostrils. Miriam slapped at her arms until they burned. Children cried, rubbing their faces raw. Even the animals shook and stamped, desperate. Overseers tried to shout orders, but their mouths filled with biting swarms. Guards waved hands like fools. No one looked powerful anymore, not even the palace. Miriam heard a strange report later, whispered like it was dangerous to repeat. Pharaoh's magicians couldn't copy this one. They stood before him and said, "This is the finger of God." Miriam stared at the ground, suddenly trembling, not because she doubted, but because it was getting real in a way that terrified her. If this was God's hand, then more was coming, and each step forward would squeeze Pharaoh tighter. A trapped king doesn't become kinder, he becomes violent. The next plague didn't bite, it covered. At midday the air turned dark with wings, flies, thick swarms that moved like one living shadow. They poured into Egyptian houses first, crawling over bread, eyes, wounds, babies' faces. People ran, screaming, swinging cloth like it could push back a storm. Miriam watched from the edge of Goshen, stunned. The noise was close enough to hear, but the swarm didn't cross into their streets. It hovered at the line like an invisible wall stood there. A Hebrew boy threw a stone at the cloud. The flies shifted, angry, then drifted back, refusing the border. Miriam's skin prickled. This wasn't random. This was aimed. By evening, Egyptians were begging, "Make it stop." And Miriam heard Pharaoh had finally called for Moses, not to obey, but to bargain. Miriam stared at the dividing line, heart pounding. God wasn't only striking Egypt, he was separating his people. And separation meant one thing. The moment to leave was getting closer. Moses came back from Pharaoh with a bitter taste in his mouth. Miriam could see it in his face before he spoke. Pharaoh had said, "Go, sacrifice to your God, here in the land." Not freedom, not release. A cage with a bigger corner. Moses refused. His voice carried through the gathered Hebrews. "We must go into the wilderness." So Pharaoh offered another deal. "Go," he said, "but not very far." Miriam heard it and felt sick. Pharaoh was bargaining with God like God was a trader at the market. Like suffering was a price you could negotiate down. Then Moses warned him, "Do not deal deceitfully again." That word, deceitfully, landed heavy, because everyone knew Pharaoh's promises were smoke. He would say yes to stop the pain, then tighten the chains the moment the air cleared, and that's exactly what happened. The flies left, the air brightened, people stopped screaming, Pharaoh's face hardened. He changed his mind like it cost him nothing. Miriam watched hope crack again in the eyes of tired men. She heard someone whisper, "We'll die here." Moses didn't answer them with soft words. He answered with a stare toward the palace and a quiet sentence that sounded like iron. "Then God will speak again." The next strike hit Egypt's strength where it hurt most, its animals. Miriam heard it first in the silence, no lowing, no bleating, no clatter of hooves in the streets. Then came the shouts, Egyptians running, wailing, pointing at fallen cattle and donkeys like they couldn't believe life could just stop. In the workyards, carts sat useless. Fields stood half-tended. Even soldiers looked uneasy without horses. Egypt's power had always ridden on beasts and bread. Now both were shaken. But in Goshen, Hebrew animals lived. Miriam watched a goat chew calmly, unaware it was standing in a miracle. Her skin tingled. Protection wasn't an idea anymore. It was visible. Pharaoh sent officials to check. They came to Goshen, counted, inspected, searching for a crack in the story. They found none. Still, Pharaoh's heart stayed closed. Miriam wanted to shake the sky. What does it take? She thought. How many signs does a king need before he admits he's not God? Moses' face was darker now, not with rage, with weight. He knew what came next, always came heavier, and Miriam felt it too. Egypt wasn't learning, it was hardening. So the plagues would keep climbing, like steps toward a door that only God could open. The sickness didn't stay with animals. It moved into skin. Miriam saw an Egyptian overseer the next day with his arms covered in sores angry red boils that made him flinch with every step. He tried to hide it under cloth, but pain doesn't hide. Another guard scratched at his neck until blood showed. Even proud faces twisted, ruined by misery they couldn't command away. Word spread fast. Moses had thrown ashes into the air, and the dust became a plague. The same dust Egypt used to grind Hebrews down, now biting back. Miriam felt a cold awe. Ashes, dust, the smallest things becoming weapons in God's hand. In the workyards, the shouting changed. Overseers still screamed, but their voices cracked. They couldn't lift the whip like before because their hands were swollen. Some staggered away, groaning, leaving orders half-finished. For the first time, Miriam saw a crack in the machine. But Pharaoh still didn't yield. Miriam imagined him sitting in cool halls while his people blistered. She imagined the magicians, once so confident, now unable even to stand in Moses' presence because their own bodies betrayed them. And Miriam understood. Pharaoh was choosing pain over surrender. That kind of pride doesn't stop. It escalates. It dares God to go further. Moses warned them clearly this time. No riddle, no soft edge. He stood before Pharaoh and said a storm was coming. Hail like Egypt had never seen. Fire mixed with ice. Death for anything left outside. Miriam heard the warning spread like alarm through the slave lines. Egyptians laughed at first. Then they saw Moses' face and stopped laughing. Some of Pharaoh's officials trembled and ran to bring servants and animals indoors. Others rolled their eyes and left everything in the fields, trusting the sky they thought they owned. That afternoon, the clouds piled up fast, black and heavy. The air turned sharp. Miriam pulled children into huts and pressed the door shut. Then it hit. Hail crashed down like stones. Roofs shook. Trees snapped. Screams rose from outside, men caught in open ground, animals panicking, carts splintering. Miriam peeked through a crack and saw a flash, fire streaking between chunks of ice, lighting the storm from inside. Egypt's land groaned under it, but over Goshen the sky held back. No hail, no fire, just tense wind and stunned quiet. Miriam's hands shook. She wasn't cheering. She was realizing God could control the sky like a hand controls a cup, and if he could do this, then Pharaoh was not just stubborn, he was suicidal. After the storm, Egypt looked bruised. Fields were shredded. Trees stood broken like snapped bones. The air smelled of wet earth and fear. Pharaoh called for Moses again, fast this time, not with laughter, with urgency. "I have sinned," he said. "The Lord is righteous." His voice sounded almost human for a moment. "Pray, and it will be enough. I will let you go." Miriam heard the words later and felt hope rise, cautious, trembling. Was this it? Had the king finally bent? Moses walked out into the open and lifted his hands. The thunder faded. The hail stopped. The sky cleared like a curtain pulled back, and Pharaoh changed again. As soon as the danger left, his promise dried up. He held the people tighter than before, like he was angry at his own weakness. When Miriam heard, she didn't even gasp. She just closed her eyes, exhausted. Pharaoh's repentance had lasted as long as the pain. Moses' face turned hard, not because he enjoyed this, because he saw the path now. Pharaoh would not free them by choice. He would have to be broken. And Miriam realized something terrifying. The plagues were no longer warnings. They were steps toward an ending. Moses warned Pharaoh one more time, and this warning sounded like darkness itself. "If you refuse," he said, "locusts will cover the land." Pharaoh's officials finally cracked. Miriam heard about it from a Hebrew who cleaned near the palace gates. The officials begged the king, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let them go." For a moment, Pharaoh called Moses back. His voice was tight. "Go, serve your God. But who exactly is going?" Moses didn't blink. "We will go with our young and our old, our sons and our daughters, our flocks." Pharaoh's face twisted. "No," he snapped, "only the men." Miriam clenched her fists when she heard it. Pharaoh didn't want worship. He wanted hostages. Children left behind meant chains stayed on hearts. Moses refused. Pharaoh drove them out. Then the wind changed. By morning, locusts arrived like a living blanket. They poured over fields that had barely survived the hail. They ate everything green. Leaves vanished. Bark was stripped. Egypt's land went bald. Miriam stood at the border of Goshen and watched the swarm move like a shadow across the horizon. And once again, she saw the truth. Pharaoh wasn't negotiating with Moses. He was losing a war he refused to admit existed. Pharaoh called for Moses again, but this time his voice was soaked in defeat and rage. "I have sinned," he said. "Forgive me, just this once. Pray your God will take this death away from me." Miriam heard the words and felt nothing. Not hope, not trust, just a tired certainty. Pharaoh only repented when he was choking. Moses prayed. The wind shifted. The locusts lifted like a curtain being pulled off the land and were driven away into the sea. And Pharaoh hardened again. That's when Moses delivered the next warning, and it wasn't about insects or storms. It was about light itself. Soon after, without thunder, without wind, a darkness fell on Egypt, thick, heavy, like the air turned to cloth. People couldn't see each other's faces. They didn't move. They sat frozen in their houses, afraid to step into what they couldn't understand. But in Goshen, lamps still burned. Families still saw each other. Miriam lit a small flame and stared at it, shaken. The difference between Egypt and Goshen wasn't just comfort now. It was reality. Miriam whispered, "If God can turn off the sun," her voice broke, because she knew what that meant. If Pharaoh still refused after darkness, the next step would be worse than anything before. And somewhere in the night, Moses was already preparing the people for a final door.